You are not special, neither am I, and neither were the men who loaded millions of innocent people onto trains bound for death camps. They went home afterward, they kissed their children goodnight, they slept soundly. The greatest atrocities in history were not committed by monsters. They were committed by ordinary people, by neighbors, by teachers, by clerks who stamped paperwork without asking questions. Hannah Arendt sat in a courtroom in Jerusalem and watched Adolf Eichmann, the man who organized the logistics of the Holocaust, and she expected to see a demon. Instead, she saw something far more terrifying. A boring bureaucrat. A man who followed orders. A man who never made up his own mind about right or wrong. And that's when Arendt understood something that should keep every single one of us awake at night. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it sits at a desk. Sometimes it looks exactly like you. The ordinary monster. Adolf Eichmann wasn't a psychopath. Psychological tests confirmed it. He had no deep-seated hatred for Jewish people. He wasn't driven by ideology or bloodlust. He was driven by something far more mundane, career advancement. The trouble with Eichmann was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, that they were, and still are, terribly and terrifyingly normal. When Arendt coined the phrase, the banality of evil, she wasn't saying evil is trivial. She was saying something far more disturbing, that monstrous acts can emerge from the most unremarkable human motivations. Ambition, conformity, the desire to belong. Eichmann sat in his glass booth during the trial and spoke about train schedules, about logistical challenges, about efficiency metrics. He used the language of management, not murder. He had compartmentalized his actions so completely that he genuinely seemed confused by the moral outrage directed at him. He was just doing his job, and that phrase, "I was just doing my job," should terrify you, because how many times have you said it yourself? The Milgram shock. In 1961, the same year Eichmann stood trial, psychologist Stanley Milgram began an experiment at Yale University that would shake our understanding of human nature. Ordinary people, teachers, salesmen, engineers were told to administer electric shocks to another person whenever they answered a question incorrectly. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They heard screams, they heard pleas to stop, they heard silence. And 65% of them continued all the way to the maximum voltage, a level marked XXX danger, severe shock. They did this because a man in a lab coat told them to. Not because they wanted to hurt anyone, not because they were evil, but because authority gave them permission. Milgram wrote afterward that he had found the essential psychological mechanism of the Holocaust in a laboratory in New Haven. Ordinary people, simply doing their jobs, can become agents of a terrible destructive process. If this is making you question everything you thought you knew about human morality, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring these uncomfortable truths with me. Because what comes next is even more disturbing. The guards next door. Here's what they don't teach you in history class. The guards at Auschwitz weren't recruited from prisons or asylums. They were recruited from normal German society. They were fathers and brothers and sons. Christopher Browning studied a reserve police battalion, middle-aged family men from Hamburg who participated directly in the murder of tens of thousands of Jewish civilians in Poland. These weren't hardened SS officers. They were ordinary policemen. Neighbors turned killers. When given the chance to opt out, and some were given that chance, only a small minority refused. The rest went along, not because they believed in Nazi ideology. Many didn't, but because they didn't want to leave their comrades to do the dirty work alone. They didn't want to seem weak. They didn't want to stand out. The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. They simply drifted into atrocity, carried by currents of conformity and obedience. And if you think you would have been different, if you're certain you would have refused, then you haven't understood the lesson yet. The Stanford prison. Philip Zimbardo wanted to understand what happens when ordinary people are placed in positions of power. So he built a prison in the basement of Stanford University and randomly assigned college students to be either guards or prisoners. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It was shut down after 6 days. Chaos. The guards, regular students just days before, had become sadistic. They stripped prisoners naked. They forced them into stress positions. They used psychological torture with enthusiasm that shocked even Zimbardo himself. And the prisoners, equally regular students, had become broken, compliant, dehumanized. They had internalized their roles so completely that they had forgotten they could simply quit. What happened in that basement wasn't unique. It was a revelation of something that exists in all of us. The uniform unlocked something. The role permitted something. Given the right circumstances, the right authority structure, the right social pressures, ordinary people transform, and that transformation can happen faster than you would ever believe possible. The mob mind. When you lose yourself in a crowd, something fundamental changes in your psychology. Gustave Le Bon called it the group mind, a state where individual conscience dissolves into collective identity. You stop thinking as yourself, you start thinking as the mob. I becomes we. And the mob is not bound by the same moral constraints as the individual. Psychologists call this deindividuation, the loss of self-awareness in group situations. It explains why people at protests do things they would never do alone, why online mobs say things no individual would say face to face, why lynchings happened in broad daylight, watched by families who brought picnic baskets. The individual becomes the crowd, and the crowd demands blood. This isn't ancient history, this is social media, this is cancel culture. This is every moment when you've joined in attacking someone you don't know, for reasons you barely understand, carried along by the righteous fury of the group. The mechanism is the same, only the technology has changed. And when the crowd disperses, when you're alone again with your thoughts, you barely recognize what you did, because it wasn't really you, was it? Moral disengagement. Albert Bandura identified 8 mechanisms that allow ordinary people to do terrible things while maintaining their self-image as good people. 1. Moral justification. We did it for a higher cause. 2. Euphemistic labeling. We call it something clean. 3. Diffusion of responsibility. Everyone was doing it. 4. Displacement of responsibility. I was just following orders. These aren't excuses. They're psychological processes that operate largely beneath conscious awareness. When drone operators call civilian casualties collateral damage, they're using euphemistic labeling. When corporations destroy environments through decisions made by committees, they're using diffusion of responsibility. The language we use shapes the evil we permit. Eichmann didn't kill anyone directly. He organized transportation. He managed logistics. He kept the trains running on time. The distance between his desk and the gas chambers was enough psychological space for him to maintain his self-image as a decent man. And that distance, that moral buffer zone, is something we all create. Every time we buy products made by exploited workers. Every time we look away from suffering because it's not our problem. We're all practicing moral disengagement. The only question is degree. Comfort over courage. The banality of evil isn't just about what people do, it's about what people don't do. Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment building in New York in 1964 while 38 neighbors watched from their windows. Nobody called the police. Nobody intervened. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We call it the bystander effect, but that clinical term obscures something uglier. It obscures the calculation that happens in every witness's mind, the calculation that weighing the cost of getting involved against the comfort of staying uninvolved. And comfort almost always wins. Silence is complicity. Germans who saw their Jewish neighbors disappearing. The neighbors of serial killers who noticed something was wrong but didn't want to make trouble. The coworkers who see harassment and say nothing because they don't want to jeopardize their position. This is evil's favorite disguise, not action but inaction, not hatred but indifference, not cruelty but the quiet choice to look the other way because standing up is inconvenient. And in that silence, atrocities find room to grow. Systems of horror. Here's what makes modern evil truly terrifying. It's systematic. No single person in the Holocaust made all the decisions. No single person pulled all the triggers. The genocide was distributed across thousands of offices, hundreds of departments, millions of small tasks. Paperwork became death. The clerk who registered property seizures, the train conductor who drove the cattle cars, the chemist who improved Zyklon B's efficiency. Each one did a small thing. Each one could tell themselves they weren't really responsible. The desk murderer is the most dangerous of all, because the desk murderer never sees the blood. Zygmunt Bauman argued that the Holocaust was uniquely modern. It required bureaucracy, industrial technology, and the rational division of labor. It required systems designed to separate actions from consequences, and those systems still exist. They exist in corporations that knowingly sell dangerous products, in governments that bomb civilians through computer screens, in algorithms that amplify hatred at scale. The banality of evil didn't end with World War II. It just got more sophisticated. The mirror test. So where does this leave us? If ordinary people can commit atrocities, if the capacity for evil lives in normal human psychology, how do we protect ourselves from becoming what we fear? The answer isn't comfortable. Vigilance, not virtue. The people who resisted, the righteous among nations who saved lives at risk of their own, weren't morally superior beings. Studies show they were often people who had strong, independent identities, who questioned authority habitually, who had been exposed to different cultures and perspectives. They were people who had developed the habit of thinking for themselves. Under conditions of tyranny, it is far easier to act than to think. The moment you stop thinking, the moment you outsource your moral judgment to a group, an authority, a system, you become vulnerable. The mirror test isn't asking whether you're capable of evil. You are, we all are. The mirror test is asking whether you're actively resisting that capability, whether you're questioning orders, whether you're thinking about consequences, whether you're willing to be uncomfortable. Your daily choice. Every single day you face small versions of the same choice that faced those German policemen, those Stanford students, those Milgram participants. Do you go along, or do you stand apart? Evil advances one small surrender at a time. It's the colleague making sexist jokes that you laugh at to fit in. It's the company policy that feels wrong but you enforce anyway. It's the social media pylon that you join because everyone else is doing it. Silence becomes speech, becomes action. The banality of evil isn't about spectacular wickedness. It's about the accumulation of tiny moral compromises. It's about the 1,000 moments when you could have said something but didn't, when you could have thought for yourself but followed instead, when you chose comfort over courage because courage is expensive. Arendt's great lesson wasn't that Eichmann was a monster. Her lesson was that you could become Eichmann, that anyone could through nothing more than the steady erosion of individual conscience. The only defense is constant, uncomfortable awareness. The only defense is refusing to stop thinking, even when thinking is hard, especially when thinking is hard. The banality of evil is not a historical curiosity. It is a warning that echoes across every generation. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. The same psychological mechanisms that enabled the Holocaust are operating right now, in this moment, in systems you participate in every day. But here's the thing about awareness, it changes you. Once you understand how ordinary people become instruments of evil, you can no longer claim ignorance. You can no longer sleepwalk into complicity. You're forced to choose consciously what kind of person you're going to be. The moment we stop questioning, we start becoming what we feared. The guards at Auschwitz didn't wake up one morning and decide to become monsters. They drifted there, one small compromise at a time, until they couldn't recognize themselves anymore. You have the same capacity, and you have the same choice. If you made it this far, comment never drift if you understand that the only defense against becoming what you fear is the refusal to stop thinking for yourself. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this made you question everything, hit like and subscribe. Understanding evil is the first step to preventing it.